it was not a grand like scheme that I had to like conquer the world or something. I literally just thought it was a good story. So what happened was I was making these documentary films, and then I got shut out of one. I had gotten a grant to do it, and then we ran out of money, and then I had to shut the whole thing down. And I was really mad, and so I started writing. That became my first novel. And in that time era, an old buddy of mine from the documentary film world, who also shot a bunch of the film in The Last Party, that film we were just talking about. He shot all that weird step frame stuff that he shot on High 8, on Super 8. And he called me up and he's like, "Hey, I got this buddy from Mongolia, and he's trying to get his film released in the US and he can't get any traction on that. Can you like talk to him or help him or something?" So I knew some people. So I said, "Well, let me see the film and then I can talk to him." So they send me the video and the screener and the press material, and I'm like, so it's a part documentary, part fiction film, and it's made in Mongolia, and it's about dogs, and there are too many dogs in Mongolia, and the story is about sort of this uncomfortable ethical extermination of dogs because they're a nuisance. But the larger ideas of it were about this idea in Mongolia about reincarnation, that your dog that protects your family for its entire life, when it dies, is going to come back as a family member. And like now, like the next baby born is going to be your dog, not like 50 years from now or something. And I saw this film and I couldn't get involved with it for a number of reasons, but I was just like, that's cool though. That's a good idea. That a dog being reincarnated. I don't know how you tell that story, but that's a good one. I got to put that down somewhere. So I kind of tucked it away. And then years later, I saw Billy Collins reading his poem, The Revenant, which is told from doggy heaven. And I was like, wait, you can tell a poem from doggy heaven? And wait, your dog can be sarcastic? Wait, and judgmental? And wait, hold on a second, time out. And I was like, I was working on this book another book for like 2 years, and it just wouldn't cohese. And then this idea comes to me, and I was like, so I got a story is going to be narrated by a dog who's pissed off that he doesn't have thumbs. Now, where am I going to set this? And what's the story? And so I started going through the process, and I had been doing some race car driving at the time. And I'm like, they actually talk like that on the racetrack. Your car goes where your eyes go. It's real. And I'm like, when you say that to a civilian, someone who doesn't go to the racetrack, they're like, you're crazy. But if a dog were to say that to a person, the person would be like, you're a guru. So I was like, I think I got this. And then I started, it kind of like, it cohesed. It suddenly like gelled. And then I started writing it. And 4 months later, I had finished the first draft. And I was like, what on earth? That was crazy. That's not from me. That's coming from somewhere else, right? I'm like a conduit here. Sent it off to my agent in New York, waited for him to call. 2 weeks later, he calls me up. And I said, did you read it? And he said, I looked at it. And I was like, what do you mean you looked at it? It's a good book. It's good. And he's like, it's narrated by a dog. He said, nobody's going to buy a book narrated by a dog. No one's going to sell a book narrated by, no marketing team would know how to market a book narrated. It's not even narrated by a dog. It's narrated by an author pretending to be a dog. And I was like, Victor Hugo wasn't a hunchback. And he just was silent. He went on this tirade then. He said, that was my third book and the first two hadn't sold very well. And, this is pivotal in my career. And I'm throwing my career out the window and taking him with me, and do me a favor. He said, take this book and throw it away and go write me something I can sell. And I was like, you're fired. So I parted with my agent and had to go find a new agent. And I didn't know who. I was looking for everybody, and they all said the same thing. This is the thing about agents. They all said the same thing. Like the story, like the ideas, like everything behind it, but gosh, it's narrated by a dog and it's not a kid's book. There's no way. No one knows we can't do that. And no agent would take it. And then I was at a fundraiser for a library system here in the Northwest, and I was talking to another writer, and I was complaining about the fact that I couldn't find an agent for my book narrated by a dog. And he looked at me and he's like, you should talk to my agent. He sold my book and it's narrated by a crow. And I was like, what? And it's true. His name is Lane Mayhew, and he wrote a book called Song of the Crow. And I called up his agent and I was like, read my book. And he's like, okay. And he called me right away, like 2 days later after I sent him pages. He called me right back and he's like, he was crying. He's like, I just finished reading this on the train and I need to represent this book. I was like, dude, you're on, because nobody else will take it. And then he went and did a great job and sold it to Harper, my wonderful publisher. And, then it kind of turned out that people will read a book. What happens in a novel is not real. I mean, it's done to suggest to us some thoughts about, like, kind of penetrating the world of ours, right? So I wasn't trying to find to represent the true relationship between man and dog, or person and dog, if you want. That wasn't what my goal was. My goal was this. I've got this narrator who doesn't speak English, who has a tongue he cannot communicate in the world around him. He is locked up. He has to live at other people's schedules. He eats what other people give him. He doesn't get choice in his life. But he's got these really rich thoughts, and I'm able to put those thoughts on the paper. And he's going to tell the story of his family. So what happens in that is that you then, as a reader, say, oh, I like that. I'm going with that. And so there are things that Enzo says that are completely absurd, that make no sense at all. And yet we're like, oh, no. Now that I think about it, I do believe that men are evolved from dogs, probably, right? It just makes more sense the way Enzo lays it out for us. And so, we're with him. So if we're with him, then what happens in the story is that he becomes Denny's alter ego. So he's he's relating a secondary story and putting moral judgment on it and saying, this is the mistake this guy's making, and here's another mistake he's making. I'm not going to go down in the history books as like some brilliant genius writer or anything. So I'm not trying to equate myself when I say this, but this is an issue. This is a structure that was used very effectively in books like The Great Gatsby, right? A 20th century novel. It's about Gatsby, right? It's his title. He's not the protagonist. He's not. Nick is the storyteller, is the protagonist. So this is like that sets up in The Art of Racing in the Rain. The main character, Denny, the race car driver, who's in the trouble and is going to lose his kid, and he's going to try and be a Formula One champion, and has all the struggles and is overcoming the obstacles. The classic protagonist is really not the protagonist of the novel. Enzo is the protagonist. But Enzo doesn't know he's the protagonist. And so that relationship, I think, allows the reader to, my point is that the reader can see a character doing something and think to themselves, oh, I wouldn't do that. And now he's got a voice of a dog saying, I wouldn't do that either. And so it becomes this kind of conspiracy between us and Enzo to kind of unfold the world, like what we really know is going on. It's definitely cool to see it come to life. Now I had the great benefit of having, in 2011, a local theater here in Seattle called Book It Repertory Theater does these wonderful translations of books to stage, and they're not dramatically played out. The actors will speak lines from the book sometimes. Sometimes they'll act out a scene, but sometimes they'll like literally turn to the audience and say what they're thinking, because books are complicated with all the unspoken, right? That's the thing that books have that movies and theater don't have, the inner thoughts of a mind, right? When you do get it in a movie, it's usually clunky narration. So they had done a brilliant version of it on stage, and it was so incredible. I mean, there was a guy playing Enzo with he had gloves on, mittens on, so he wouldn't have fingers. And he was playing Enzo. And I remember I went to it several times when it was running. And I remember going to one of them and sitting by myself just to, I just liked watching it. And I would sit and I was sitting there and there was this guy next to me who was clearly the husband of the woman next to him. And clearly he was not pleased that he was dragged to a show called The Art of Racing in the Rain about a dog. And he was not having it. He was thumping before the show. He's like going angrily paging through the program. He was thumping and and finally I kind of just leaned over to him and I said, dude, it sounds ridiculous. Like this, a thing with a dog, actor playing a dog. I said, but by the end of this play, you're going to believe. And he looked at me like, what? He didn't know who I was. He's like, what? So watch the play, and it goes, and then it ends, and the lights come up, and I look over at the guy, and he's crying. And he says, I believe. And I was like, that's it.